Thanks, Minister. Member for Vancouver-Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Got the wrong speaker. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise today to speak on the budget, but before I begin my remarks, I want to offer some thanks to some people who helped me do my job. I want to start by thanking my two constituency assistants, Ashley Fair and Jared Hagland. They're in the office every day. They meet the constituents who come in with problems. They help them navigate those problems, navigate some of the systems in government that they're needing to access or interface with. And they also make sure that I stay in touch with the issues that are important to the constituents and that I'm accessible to them. I also want to thank my legislative assistant, Jean Lawson, who helped set up the important meetings that I have to have with various stakeholder groups within my critic portfolio areas, and who also keeps me on the straight and narrow on a daily basis. And I also want to thank the research staff for our caucus. I won't name individuals because I think at one time or another I've been in every single one of their offices or cubicles to seek advice on a particular issue, and they frankly have been great. So let me start my remarks on the budget by saying that I actually agree with the Minister of Energy and Mines on one thing. I agree with the Minister of Energy and Mines that British Columbians are tired of people making things up. And that's why I'm going to focus my remarks on this budget on the things that I think have been made up, are misleading, as well as on the great gaps, the flaws that this budget of the Christie-Clark government has for the needs of British Columbia. Sorry, the Premier's government. So let me also thank the residents of Vancouver-Fairview, the ones I've met on the street, the ones I've met in small businesses, the ones who come into our community office, who talk to me about the things that are important to them. It's not always the things that I want to hear, but it's important for me to know the issues that affect them and their families on a daily basis. And it's those conversations that help me shape my views about what is important for us to do in this House, as well as what I think is important to establish as priorities in a budget. The other day, a number of high school students came to visit me in my office. They came under the banner of Defend Our Future. They're sometimes known as Kids for Climate Action. Nick Millam is actually the first student appointed as a school trustee in the Vancouver area. He came with Justin and Tiffany. Others who have met with me over the time are Sophie, Sharon, and Sam. These are the children that the government so often talks about that shouldn't be saddled with a debt. And I agree they shouldn't be saddled with a debt. I agree that they shouldn't be saddled with an environmental debt, with a climate crisis debt, something that will hang over their heads for years to come and will impact not only their personal lives, but the economy that they will inherit from us, an economy that can be devastated by the unforeseen consequences of runaway climate change. I also want to thank the many residents of Vancouver-Fairview who came to a recent town hall meeting. They raised concerns with me, including transit and the environment. Both those issues were raised by seniors, one of them who could attend the meeting that I've met several times. Ruth talked to me about her ability to get around, her desire for the kind of health care that will enable her to stay and age in place in her home. Another senior who has emailed me on a number of occasions but can no longer get out of her apartment, Anne, often shares her worries about the future, not just for herself, but for her children and grandchildren. Others came and talked about education and the economy. Ruth's grandson, Alex, her adopted grandson, is looking for a future. He's undergoing trades training and apprenticeship so he can become a plumber. He's hoping to have opportunities for a good job. We'll get back to that in a little while. So let me also say that within this budget, no budget from any side of the House appears totally negative. There are a couple of things in this budget that I want to start off by praising. I was happy to see the tobacco tax increase because the smoking of tobacco not only impacts the people who smoke, it impacts those around them and costs the health system, the healthcare system, and of course our budget untold millions of dollars. And I was also happy to see a commitment to cancer prevention and research initiatives. The BC Cancer Society, whose CEO, Barbara Kaminsky, is a resident in Vancouver-Fairview. The society itself operates out of Vancouver-Fairview, have talked to me often about the things that we need to do and can do to help prevent cancer and raise awareness. And I'm pleased to see this government make at least a modest commitment to working with the society and others who work in this important area. But I have to say, Honourable Speaker, notwithstanding the importance of those issues, overall, I just do not see enough in this budget that matches up with the concerns of British Columbians in Vancouver-Fairview or other parts of British Columbia who come and talk to me on a regular basis. It just doesn't match up. Overall, British Columbians will pay more and get less. That's a theme that permeates this budget throughout. It's a flawed budget from this Premier's government, and I will oppose it. It's a budget that's long on politics, but short on support for British Columbians, and it doesn't even keep the promises that were made in the throne speech a mere couple of weeks ago. In the throne speech, Honourable Speaker, was a reference to a commitment to a violence-free BC, specifically dealing with the important issue of violence against women, and particularly Aboriginal women. 2 weeks later, Honourable Speaker, nothing in the budget that relates to this, no funds to implement the recommendations of the Missing Women's Commission, a cut to victim services, and including the line item that has the Office of Domestic Violence. What a difference 2 weeks make, Honourable Speaker. I also want to talk briefly about an issue that came up recently in question period, and that's the risk of violence to women, primarily Aboriginal women, on Highway 16, otherwise known as the Highway of Tears. We talked about the importance of a shuttle bus so women would not have to put themselves at risk through hitchhiking, and so their families would not have to worry about women who go missing or women who are moving from one community to another. And Honourable Speaker, not only did we not get a satisfactory answer to the issue of funding a shuttle bus on the Highway of Tears, we had the Minister of Health heckle across this chamber and say that you'll get a shuttle bus when you win an election. Honourable Speaker, I can't imagine a more reprehensible comment by a member of a government. Honourable Speaker, the shuttle bus isn't for us. It's for women who are at risk in northern British Columbia. It's for their families. It's in memory of every woman whose life was lost. And it's a shame on this chamber, but it's also specifically a shame on this government that the minister, neither the minister nor anyone in the government nor any MLA apologized for that insensitive remark, not to us, but to the families of the women who have gone missing. Another broken promise, Honourable Speaker, was one to enhance skills training in British Columbia and to put British Columbians first in line for BC jobs. So what do we have in the skills training budget? It's flatlined. While the Industry Training Authority credentials issued declined 4% last year, post-secondary education funding is cut. There's a $109 million cut in transfers to post-secondary education, and the Minister of Advanced Education can stand up in the House if he'd like and say that this has to do with administrative savings, but frankly, Honourable Speaker, that puts him directly at odds with all of the university presidents who sent a letter to this government warning that if there was a decrease in funding to post-secondary institutions, it would be education and students and the future of British Columbia that would suffer. BC, Honourable Speaker, and I just came about an hour ago from a meeting with representatives of students' associations across BC, and they reaffirmed what I understand to be true. British Columbia is the only province without post-secondary student grants. It lends the least to students going to post-secondary institutions with the highest interest rate in Canada, and we have the highest level of student debt in North America here in British Columbia. Almost $35,000 per undergraduate student on graduations. British Columbians simply can't afford to attend post-secondary, and that's demonstrated by the fact that British Columbians are the least likely to study and attend post-secondary institutions on a full-time basis. They simply cannot afford it, Honourable Speaker. This budget cuts employment programs by 46%. So what does that say to us? It says we're going to build BC and fill whatever jobs are created with temporary foreign workers. 29% of new jobs in BC over the last period of time have been filled by temporary foreign workers, almost double the Canadian average. And of course, under the jobs plan, the flawed jobs plan of this BC Liberal Premier, we have seen a net number of jobs lost overall. Honourable Speaker, let me move on to the issue of taxes. In this House, the Minister of Finance said that with respect to taxes, British Columbia was #1 in competitiveness. Well, I'm not sure what the Finance Minister means by that, but what we actually see in this budget is an increase in what I will term flat taxes or fees for a variety of services. We have the medical services premium flat tax, a premium that, despite the government's promise to hold medical services plan flat tax fee increases to the level of increases in the health budget, will go up 4%, while spending on health only goes up 2.6%. Over 3 years, those increases will cost the average BC family $400. Let's deal with BC Hydro. The Minister of Energy talked a lot about BC Hydro. So what do we have? We have rates climbing 28% over a 5-year period, 20% in the next 3 years alone, or another $477 per family. Medical services plan and hydro rate increases alone will equal about $800 for the average family. Honourable Speaker, that makes life less affordable for British Columbians. And when you combine that with ICBC rates going up, they went up 4.9% last November, $2,300 in tuition fees for undergraduates, higher today, $2,300 higher today than 2001. We have a litany of measures under this government that have replaced a progressive tax system with regressive, flat taxes and fees that hurt the people who can afford it the least. Under this Premier's flawed plan for BC, we will pay more and we will get less. Now let me move to the issue that the Minister of Energy and Mines, that every speaker on the other side of the House, that the Minister of Finance talked about so much, and that's the importance of the fact that they have balanced the budget. And let me simply say that it looks real nice on paper, but it's a fiction. It's sleight of hand. Or perhaps I should say the budget is balanced by putting the government's hands in the pockets of British Columbians. So what do I mean by this? We see an increase in the dividend taken from BC Hydro from $243 million to $410 million, despite the promise before the election of the government that they would not increase this dividend. And this is from a debt-ridden corporation. A debt-ridden corporation with a $16 billion in debt and rising, with $4 billion hidden in deferral accounts. An additional $2.9 billion in debt will accrue to this troubled Crown Corporation. So what does this government do? It takes a dividend from a corporation that is not profitable, and I want to make it absolutely clear, I am not talking about water rents here, I am talking about dividends from a debt-ridden corporation that is not producing a profit. It transfers it into the budget as income, and presto, we have a balanced budget. And who pays for this balanced budget? It is the businesses in British Columbia, small, medium, and large. It's the people of British Columbia who will see the 28% hydro rate increase over 5 years, a rate increase made worse by the fact that this government is balancing its budget by taking dividends. We normally associate the term dividend with a profit, and yet we're taking dividends from a corporation. We're taking dividends from a corporation that is debt-ridden, that's drowning in debt, whose debt is increasing. And this government will not submit the issue of a rate increase to the BC Utilities Commission, to an independent third party. This government, if the minister opposite believes that this is appropriate, then let the BC Utilities Commission, the independent third party, rule on this. But no, the Minister of Finance goes to the Minister of Energy and says, I need money. And the Minister of Energy goes to the CEO of BC Hydro and says, cough it up. This dividend alone exceeds in every year of this 3-year budget plan the slim surplus projected by this government. And that's not even including the one-time asset sales that should never be included in an operating budget. This government and its predecessor like to accuse the New Democrat government of creating a structural deficit. Honourable Speaker, this budget contains 3 structural deficits in a row with no end in sight. Honourable Speaker, the Premier says that this government and their ministers are good economic managers. Unfortunately, Honourable Speaker, I do not, as the members opposite may have assumed, agree with the Premier on this flawed analysis. Let's talk about the good economic management of this government. The debt will go up $7.1 billion over 3 years. Let's talk about living within our means. Northwest Transmission Line, 82% over budget. Port Mann Bridge, $1.8 billion over budget. BC Hydro Accounting has $4.8 million in 18 different deferral accounts, which led the Auditor General to utter this quite memorable and instructive phrase, there is an appearance of profitability where none exists. Yet this does not stop this government from taking an unearned dividend from a corporation that's drowning in debt to pretend that it has a real balanced budget as opposed to a paper balanced budget built on structural deficits. This government, Honourable Speaker, has the worst record in private sector job growth in Canada from September 2011 to January of this year. It has the highest unemployment rate of the Western provinces, and under this budget, we will see the unemployment rate go up. Jobs Minister, unemployment rate go up this year, go up. Through the Speaker to the Jobs Minister, this budget will see the unemployment rate go up and up and stay high. From 2006 to 2012, we went from the second lowest. We went from the
Members, through the chair. Members.
He said that. And it was disgusting and appalling, and the fact that you're not disgusted and appalling
Members.
says a lot about you.
Members.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker?
Members. Member from Fairview has, Vancouver-Fairview has the floor, so please continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's an honour to have inspired such passion in the members of the House. From 2006 to 2012, BC went from having the second lowest young adult unemployment rate in Canada to having the highest young adult unemployment rate in Canada. 1 in 5 25 to 29-year-olds are not working and not in school. That's not good news for Alex, my young friend who is looking for a career as a plumber. The list goes on, Honourable Speaker. The Finance Minister can crow if he wants, and he can use all the nautical analogies that he wants to make fun of the budget and to crow about what a great job his government has done in balancing the budget and having a great credit rating. But the truth is, BC families are drowning under unaffordable fee increases and continuing economic uncertainty, highlighted by growing unemployment and the fleeing of people to other jurisdictions because of the loss of private sector jobs in British Columbia. Honourable Speaker, the budget contradicts the throne speech in three key areas of concern. Let me start with jobs. First of all of the eggs of this government's plan is in the LNG basket. And yet, in this budget, there's no LNG revenue projected. There's no LNG jobs in the three-year plan. But there is, Honourable Speaker, tremendous opportunity in other sectors that we don't see this budget address. Regrettably, we don't see this budget address. Scientific research tax credit is flat. BC is among the lowest jurisdictions in Canada in terms of this tax credit, and yet it could spur investment in technology. It could double the amount of the GDP from this important sector that results. It could increase the number of jobs on a much steeper curve. Ontario exceeds BC in research and development, and Alberta exceeds BC in funding its Innovation Council. And the result, although we have had growth in tech jobs, and I'm pleased with that and I applaud it, our tech sector job growth in BC lags the Canadian average and it lags the global average. We should be growing the technical pool, the talent pool, the science and technology pool by graduating more post-secondary students in these areas, and yet we see $109 million in cuts. Let me talk briefly about digital animation. A couple of weeks ago, the Finance Minister said in an interview with the Times Colonist when he was questioned about extending the distant location tax credit to Victoria that it was a promise that was made in the election and therefore they should probably keep it. And he did. He kept that promise, and I applaud him for that. But he broke another promise made during the election, and that was to extend the digital animation and visual effects tax credit to post-production. That is nowhere to be seen in this budget. Honourable Speaker, my colleague from Saanich South spoke this morning about the importance of the creative sector. We believe on this side of the House that not only is it important culturally in BC, it's important in many, many economic ways. It employs many people, and yet Creative BC, a worthwhile organization, has had its funding established and capped at $1 million. Compare this to Ontario. Their Media Development Corporation received $23 million in funding from their government. This is money that can be used for research and development, for export marketing, for market research and seed funding for all the arts. When BC's film sector asked this government for $600,000 to $800,000 for feature film seed funding, compared to Ontario's $4.3 million, the government said no. This is funding that would have levered additional investment and created jobs, and this government did not think it was a worthwhile investment. We see no economic analysis from the Transportation Minister on the cuts to ferries, notwithstanding the fact that the MLA for Caribou-Chilcotin has talked about the devastating impact on the tourist industry in her constituency. We see nothing, no plan to support energy retrofits. Instead, we see the end of the Live Smart program and a cut to the Innovative Clean Energy Fund of 54%. We see fewer services. Unaffordability is increasing. We pay more, we get less. Ruth and Ann, the seniors in my constituency who worry justifiably not only about their kids and grandkids, but about their future, their ability to be taken care of at home, to age in place, see fees increase, but a mere 2.6% increase in the health budget, and not a significant commitment to the kind of health care that will save the system money in the long term and make them more comfortable and established in their community. We see government cuts implemented through health authorities. We see the art studio cut. We see a cut in funding from Vancouver Coastal Health because they're being starved by this government of necessary funds to the West Coast Mental Health Network. They service their clients at an average cost per year of $125. Compare that to the costs of people with mental health problems who don't get the support, the peer support, and the treatment they need. It's far greater. It may be penny-wise, but it's certainly pound-foolish. Honourable Speaker, in Fairview, the cost of housing is a concern, but there's no mention in this budget of innovative approaches to make housing affordable, whether it's support for co-ops or for nonprofits. We see a minuscule amount of money for childcare, $55 per child stacked up against the cost of over $1,000 a month for most parents. We offered a 20% reduction in fees. The business community understands that childcare is important to the economy. They understand that it helps families. Honourable Speaker, finally, in terms of the overall economy, let me simply say to members opposite who talk about what a great job they do in creating jobs in this province, and of course I say it to the members opposite through you, Honourable Speaker, over 21,000 private sector jobs lost in the 200 days this legislature did not sit to deal with the issues that British Columbians face every day. Unemployment is rising in the next 2 years. While I'm cautiously optimistic about some of the recent conversations between the Transport Minister and the mayors in the Lower Mainland, the fact remains that 5 years ago, this government made a commitment to work on funding, and nothing has happened, nothing on transit. Congestion is building, costing the whole BC economy, not just the Lower Mainland, as regions try to get their goods to port, up to $1.5 billion a year. Nothing additional for tech industries. Debt climbing to almost $70 billion in 2016-17. So much for being debt-free, and if the government or the Premier or any of the ministers opposite think that LNG can pay off this debt by 2028, let me simply say that will take a pay down of over $6 billion a year. If anybody believes that, there's lots of bridges around British Columbia. So in summary, let me simply say that British Columbians deserve honesty in this budget, honesty from the government, real job prospects, and not merely pipe dreams. I will not support this budget because under the Premier's flawed plan, we will pay more, we will get less. The Finance Minister can talk about the budget ship all he wants, but it's heading straight for our lifeboats. It's going to capsize the average British Columbian and drive us under the water. Honourable Speaker, I think about Ruth and Anne, worried about the health supports they need to age in place. I worry about Alex trying to access trades training so he can be a plumber and have a good job and raise a family in Vancouver-Fairview. I worry about that in the context of employment program cuts and education cuts. And I think about Nick, Sophie, Sam, Tiffany, Justin, and Sharon, who reject the false choice that this government and this budget offers them, saying they have to choose between the environment or the economy, when we know that a strong economy depends on a healthy environment and the social license of British Columbians to develop it. Those young people will be the ones who will inherit a dangerous and expensive future, the future in store if we don't address in very real terms greenhouse gas reductions in this province, take real action on climate change, and build an economy that furthers our addressing climate change while providing real jobs for the children of the future. So I will oppose this budget. Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker.